Join us for part two of our deep dive into the history of Zephyr with David Givens. Well, we have Monday, August, what is it, 22nd?
22nd.
2022. The twos are piling up. And David Givens has joined me again for part two of our deep dive into the history of Zephyr and how that really wound up having this amazing band existing in Boulder during a magical time that is worth looking into in a deep way. So, David, I'm glad that you, after part one, were willing to do part two. So, how's it going?
I'm doing okay. I'm hoping that we can get this, in some sort of form that makes sense to people. So let's give it a shot. Let's see what we can.
And in all the conversations we've been having, there's different
Uh-oh.
paths to go down um,
Yeah.
in terms of talking about Zephyr. And today I'd really want to focus on the creative path. And of course, there's a business path that's got all kinds of depth and meat on the bone. But we want to save that and just try to focus today on, as much as we can, on the creative piece of how you guys came together as a band, started writing music, started playing out, started blowing everybody's minds, started recording, and all of that. So last time we had set up at the end of part one how two bands, there was Ethereal Zephyr that John Ferris and Tommy were in, and there was Brown Sugar that you and Candy were in, and you guys had started crossing paths. And one show in particular, I think you had shared, it became clear that, wait a minute, maybe we should try to put something together here. So let's pick it up from there in terms of the point of that day that light bulb went off in your head, I believe, about maybe we should try to get something going here.
Okay. Well, I guess that day was a Wednesday night at the Buff Room. Uh, Brown Sugar had a regular gig on Wednesday nights. Buff Room was a 3-2 beer joint. Um, it was packed, and when we played, it clicked and it was wonderful, and we all liked it. And I said to Tommy, um, maybe we ought to try doing this a little more. And he was like, yeah, I think so too. So we got together, we borrowed a drummer, and we played a couple of songs. We played St. James Infirmary was actually the first song we ever played because Ferris had some clue about how to play it, and sort of led us through that. Um, and so we decided, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to get a band together. So we found Robbie Chamberlain. Uh, he was the missing link. He was the right guy. We looked at each other as the best examples of each of our disciplines. Candy was the best girl singer harp player. Tommy was the best guitar player. John was the best keyboard player. I was the best bass player. Robbie was the best drummer. We really were convinced of that because we kind of knew what was going on around, the Front Range, and so we were pretty excited about playing together. Um, when we started playing, uh, we didn't know what to play because our repertoires did not cross. Our set lists were very different. Um, so John and Tommy had been playing this band Ethereal Zephyr, and one of the songs that they played was 40,000 Headmen by Traffic. So that was one of the songs we decided. We just started pulling stuff out that we could play. So we played 40,000. This is all in Candy's mom and dad's basement. There's no gigs. There's no nothing. Um, so we
Where,
started.
where, where was that? Where was that?
That was out in Brighton. Candy's mom, I don't know, 10 acres out there. That's where they kept Candy's horse. Um, she had two. She has a younger sister, like 18 months younger than she is. And then there was another generation of children that were at that point, I guess, maybe 8 and 5 or something like that. And her mom and dad were out there pretty much in the middle of nowhere. And the lower floor of their house was sort of like a flat, and they let us stay there for, I don't even know how long it was now. It wasn't long, maybe a week or two. But we set up down there, and Tommy got his first Echoplex, and he was learning how to use that. And I had started to write some music. The first song that I pulled out was the song that ended up being "Cross the River," which was our opener for, I think, the entire our entire 2-year career. We pretty much always opened with that. And so we started working on that, and they also did a Procol Harum tune, "Repent Walpurgis," which is an instrumental song that John really liked. John was a big fan of what was the keyboard player in the Animals? Alan Price, was that his name?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that was one of John's, someone he admired, and he really liked the guy Gary. Whoa,
Brooker. Gary Brooker.
Yeah, Gary Brooker. So we did a pretty good version of that, actually, and in fact, there's a couple of versions of that on the reissue of the Bathtub record that we did in 2014. There's some bonus tracks, and I believe 2 of the bonus tracks are us playing "Repent Walpurgis." One was at Reed Ranch in 1969 in the summer, and one was at a reunion gig at Tulagi's in 1973 when we got back together for a few gigs before Tommy left for the James Gang. About this time, we were starting to, gel. Robbie was driving up from Denver. He stayed at home with his parents. The rest of us were there at the acreage. And one of our friends, Frank Anton, who was a student at CU, and he was also fancied himself a singer. And I'm not sure how he and Tommy were connected, but Frank invited us to move into his house at 427 Canyon, which is right across the street from what is now the police station and the jail. At that time, it was referred to as the Ruins because it had been started to be a hotel, which failed halfway through, and it was just this monument to, I don't know, avarice or something, incompetence. Anyway, we lived right across the street from that in this little house. I bet that house was probably 1,000 square feet, if it, maybe. John moved in with his girlfriend, Phyllis, who was known as Sheba, and really nice woman. And Tommy and Karen moved in, sort of. Karen had to go back to Denver periodically because she was still 16 and living in her father's house.
No, she was the same age as Tommy.
Oh, so she was 17?
However old Tommy was, she's
7.
exactly the same age.
Yeah, 69. He was, this was before his birthday that we moved.
And she graduated May of '69.
Oh, did she? Okay, so she was probably 17. Yeah, okay. I don't remember when her birthday is.
I don't have it memorized, but I have
I don't know. It doesn't matter.
It's like 4 months before Tommy, I think.
Okay. Springtime, about this time.
Yep.
So we moved into Frank's house. Frank had a nice record collection, and he had stacks. I think he had every issue of Rolling Stone magazine that had been out. And at that time, it was like a fold-over newspaper, right?
Yep.
So we read those, and a lot of Zap comics. We read a lot of Zap comics at that time, and we listened to a lot of Led Zeppelin's first album and Laura Nero's first album. Miles Davis, pardon me?
Was Jimmy in the mix there, Jimi Hendrix?
You know, we did. I don't think we had that record. Candy and I had listened to Jimi Hendrix nonstop when we lived in Aspen. When Axis Bold as Love came out, that we listened to that. That and Disraeli Gears, Procol Harum's first record, um, Aretha Franklin, Aretha's Gold, um, Little Walter's Greatest Hits. Uh, Pink Floyd, More, the instrumental stuff that they did. It was a movie score, I think. Grateful Dead, uh, the album that had Walk Me Out in the Morning Dew on it. Um, Big Brother, their first record, it had Cry to Me, I think, was on that, I recall. But we did some of that stuff in Brown Sugar, actually. Um, Especially the Aretha stuff. Candy liked singing Aretha songs, you know. But anyway, back to 427. We set up all of our equipment in the little bitty living room, and we just started making stuff up. And we came up with enough songs to play about a set and a half before we ever went out and tried to play. And there was a Muddy Waters song that we did. We did a wide variety of things because we had a wide variety of things that we liked. You know, Tommy had that background in Sioux City of going out to the blues club, you know. Candy was a huge fan of Muddy Waters and Little Walter. I grew up in Detroit playing blues stuff with the bands that I played in, among other things. I played a lot of like Ray Charles and James Brown kind of stuff in Detroit. But that was, you know, we didn't have a hard time figuring out what direction we wanted to go because it just seemed like we were already all there. We were already all in that spot, you know. And Tommy was astonishing. Robbie was astonishing. It was just, you know, we got into these sort of long jams, and it was like we, you know, crawled into each other's brains, you know, and it was very, very easy to do. You know, I recall, you know, making up the middle part of Hard Charging Woman and going, okay, you know, let's do this. You know, let's take a break right here, and then we'll come in playing double time. That always works because we'd all played in clubs, and we all knew what would get people out on the dance floor, and that was our goal, was to be able to play our own music, basically, but still get, you know, be able to eat. So that meant we had to play in the bars and get people to dance. So we all pretty much agreed on where we were going with this thing. And Candy and Frank worked on lyrics together. Frank didn't write so much as he sort of coached her through the writing of some of this stuff. So after, God, I can't tell you how long it was. Uh,
Was Candy more the poet in terms of coming up with lyrics?
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I can't recall any. The only song I remember that Tommy came in and said, "Okay, here are the lyrics," was when he wrote a song called "Going Back to Texas," and I immediately changed that to "Going Back to Colorado" because I thought "Going Back to Texas" was already taken, and also we weren't in Texas. And Candy and I wrote pretty much the lyrics for that song. Tommy wrote the music, and we wrote the lyrics. I think I gave Candy all the writing credit on that, but she wrote a good chunk of it. Um, Later, Tommy and John Tezar, who was his next door neighbor when we lived in an apartment building on Marine Street, uh, John was going to school at CU to be an engineer. He turned out to be a guy who designed headlights for automobiles, among other things. Very nice guy, and he's the one who wrote the lyrics for Tommy's compositions later. I don't know if he did any after us, but they were
He
pretty good
did.
partnership.
He
Yeah.
did.
Okay.
So here you are on 427 Canyon, and you're
Yeah.
getting a repertoire together to start being able to play out. So what songs, what original songs can you pinpoint at that
Okay, we
point?
came up with "Sail On." We came up with "Hard Charging Woman." We came up with "Cross the River." We came up with um, "Somebody Listen." We came up with this instrumental piece that I wrote that got hooked onto the front of "Someone Listen" or "Somebody Listen," whatever the name of that is. What else? Those are the ones that come to mind. There were actually a couple of songs that got dropped along the way. We we learned to "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," which is what we used for an encore for, I don't know, probably at least until our first album came out. We used to do that, and we did sort of this gospel version of it, which is kind of funny, but it was pretty good. It was pretty fun. We liked it, and it also it kind of like after that there was nothing that we couldn't follow that with anything. If people would go, "Oh, come out and play an encore," so we'd go out and play one of our songs. Sometimes we play one that we had played earlier because we didn't have a lot to choose from. A lot of times we would just go blues in A, you know, or blues in B or whatever, and uh, we could pull that off. We could just sort of jam. During that time, I'm thinking. Uh, for years, I thought that our first gig was at the Sink, but I don't think that's true. I think we may have played in the city park, Central Park in Boulder, in the band shell, and I think we played out in a couple of. They were like fundraisers for. There was a spay clinic and a free clinic and a battered women's shelter. Those are three that come to mind right now. That we played. We didn't get paid, but we raised money to get those things started. Um, and I think those were mostly outdoors.
So,
Um,
so, so right at that point, what do you guys, you're all in this tiny house. You've
yep.
now got these songs, you're ready to go out and play. What was the individual and collective kind of emotional vibe going on? I got to imagine it was pretty exciting.
It was pretty jolly. We were always cracking jokes, and we thought we were pretty funny. And Tommy and Frank Anton used to do a sort of, uh, they had a little comedy act that they did. Where Tommy was Tony Bolinetti, and they were like pretending they were gangsters. Yeah, they were very funny. But mostly, we were happy. We were so excited to the music was so good, and it was so easy to do. There was none of this. No, you can't do it that way. You got to do it like this. It wasn't like that. It was really a lot of, can we do this? Well, let's see. And we'd do something, and it'd go, yeah, I think we can do that. And we'd save it, and we'd memorize it, and that would be that. And then the next day we would come in and go over what we had just made up, and then we would start afresh making new stuff up. So it took us about a month to come up with that list of songs that I gave you. And in addition, there were some cover tunes that we did. There's a song called Satin Doll, which is, I think, a Duke Ellington song. We did that. We did, there's another song called Sack of Woe that we did. There was a Muddy Waters song called Same Thing that we did. I think we might have done a couple of Little Walter songs. I think we may have done Mean Old World and My Babe. I think we did those as well. And Repent While Purchase. And then we would stretch them out. Some of those songs, like, I remember playing at the band shell, and we started when it was still blue sky and ended up in the dark. And we played that whole time. And we invited, we had John Alphonse, the conga player, sat in with us, and there was a guy, John, the trumpet player, who was really a good musician. I mean, he was, he was sort of in the mold of Miles Davis, So we're playing all this sort of fusiony sounding rock jazz stuff, and he was playing horn on top of it, and it was really great fun. And there was, I mean, I don't know how many people were there, but it was full. I mean, as far as you could see, there were people. So it was really exciting. I think I remember something about having to go over to the police station and talk to somebody to so that they would allow us to continue at some point. My memory is kind of foggy about that. That was generally Karen and Tommy were really happy. I mean they were young and in love. Candy and I were really happy. We were young and in love. John and Sheba were happy, and by this time, and I don't remember exactly when this happened chronologically, but Barry Fay got involved, and
Well, before he got involved, who was involved?
well,
Kit and Marty, right?
Marty, yeah, Kid Thomas and Marty Wolf. They were the ones who brought Tommy to jam with us, and they were the ones that we abandoned to let Barry manage us. And the reason I know that Barry was involved at this point is because we had left town a couple times. We had gone to San Francisco to play at the Avalon Ballroom. And we had also gone to, prior to that, let me think.
So who would have got you that Avalon gig? Because that was Chet Helms's room, who of course had partnered with Barry on the Family
Yeah,
Dog.
Barry made the phone call. I don't know, I don't know any of the mechanics of it because that wasn't my interest.
Was that the first out of Colorado gig?
Well, I'm thinking that the first out of Colorado gig is in April. Barry sent us down to Phoenix, and we played at a club down there that was sort of the rock club, and it was the first gig we played was Steve Miller. We opened for Steve Miller, and that was after Boz Scaggs had quit the band, and Steve was trying to replace Cream because Cream had just broken up. And so Steve had a three-piece band, Tim, the bass player, I think, it was Tim the drummer. I think Tim might have, anyway. So he was out there jamming, and then I think he saw Tommy, he kind of went, maybe I think I'm going to have to go a different direction here. But Steve was cool. He was really, he was he was the first rock star we met. And
Yeah, I think you guys had him on a pedestal.
yes, we did.
Yeah.
We were big fans of Children of the Future. Great. I love that album today, and so we thought he was going to be like this super wise, peaceful, stoned out guy. And we went into the dressing room and he was sitting back there tipping a couple of Budweisers and, sit down, have a beer, kind of guy. And that was a little bit of a wake-up call, as it turned out. Now we found out that, all these people in show business, they're just people, That was nice. That was a good thing. And he was really sort of kind. And we bumped into him several times over the course of a thing, and he was always very nice. But he's the first person who said to Candy, don't scream, just sing. You got a beautiful voice, just sing. And of course, Candy went in one ear and out the other because she had a vision. She wanted to be Robert Plant. And, I could make an argument that she was sort of the girl version of that. In fact, I talked to Kit Thomas about this just a couple of years ago. And he said that was his idea when he brought Tommy down, was to have a sort of a Led Zeppelin kind of band, but with a girl singer, And I guess, that we qualified at some level for that. So I think I would have to say that the first thing was the trip to Phoenix. Oh, excuse me, I gotta get rid of that phone call. So then the next time we left Colorado, I think may have been to go to New York to meet Stan Greason, our manager, and to play. I think we went up and played. Yeah, we went up and played in Boston with Led Zeppelin at the Boston Tea Party for a couple nights, and that went well.
So
Um,
Stan Greason, I guess we can go more in depth into that. But how did this happen that he was quote unquote your manager, and what? And just from a title perspective, what was Barry's title?
Barry's title was personal manager, and Stan's title was business manager. Um, Barry was going to help us manage all the millions that we were going to make, and Stan was going to implement that. Unfortunately, Stan wasn't qualified, and as it turned out, Barry wasn't either, and perhaps neither were we. I'm not sure, but those two guys definitely weren't. But I think really one of the most interesting things to me about our trip to Boston to play with Led Zeppelin was we were having trouble with Robbie. That started pretty early. Tommy and Robbie just bumped head. What the deal was. Two Leos, I think. I think some astrologer told me at one point. Two Leos in the same situation aren't going to do very well. So whether that's true or not, it was kind of like that. Their egos bumped up against each other. Robbie was always going, well, Tommy thinks he's a better drummer than I am. And, and Tommy was sort of, oh, Robbie. And, there was just this not cool thing. So I called the drummer that I grew up playing with in Detroit, a guy named Julian Wilson. And Julie was in New York working as a computer operator. And really great drummer. So we went and saw Julie and said, hey, want to be in a band? And he was like, yeah. So we rehearsed at the Albert Hotel and got the band together. And when we went up and played in Boston, Julie was the drummer for those nights that we played with Led Zeppelin.
So what happened? Where was Robbie? Did you leave him back in Boulder or what?
Yeah, we sent him back to Denver. Or actually, I think we left and didn't tell him. I think it was something like that. Yeah, kids. But that didn't work out. Julie was, he was. I don't know what he was. He was he was having a hard time playing with me because he had kicked me out of the band that we were in back in Detroit. After being really great friends for 3 years, we got into some kind of snit fit. I don't even remember what it was, but he had given me the boot out of the band, which is one of the reasons I ended up in Colorado.
And here you are now in this thing called Zephyr.
Yeah.
And that ain't the dynamic of back in Detroit 3 years before.
No. No, it wasn't. He was kind of, just kind of shocked, But he kind of went right back into his he was kind of a manipulator. He was, kind of a Detroit hotshot guy, rich kid, came from a wealthy family and, and one thing led to another and he exited and Robbie came back.
But he was there for those 3 nights in Boston.
Yep. Yep.
So I know that let's set that stage. Here's Led Zeppelin. The first album has come out. It's getting massive airplay.
Okay.
They have yet to play any kind of arenas or whatever. They're doing club tours. And somehow Zephyr winds up opening for them for 3 nights, which means cross-fertilization opportunity for everybody to check each other out.
Yeah.
And this was still relatively new for Led Zeppelin to be here in the States, doing gigs, and then being paired up with bands that they didn't know.
Yep.
So let's go back and try to stop in the middle of this 3 days of Zephyr opening for Led Zeppelin in a club in Boston.
Yeah. Well, the club was big. It was sort of the Boston equivalent of, say, Winterland, Fillmore West. It seemed like a lot of the big cities had a place like that. Chicago had the Avalon Ballroom. Um, Boston had the Tea Party, and it was like that. Cleveland had a place, Denver, obviously. Uh, anyway, we went up there, and of course, we were pretty excited because we were, really well acquainted with Led Zeppelin's first album. They had just played in Hawaii, and they were at the very beginning of their second tour of the U.S., and they had just started working on their second album, the second Led Zeppelin album, with Eddie Kramer, the Hendrix engineer. Um, and they were, they had supposedly they were about done with it. Anyway, as we were hauling our stuff in to the Boston Tea Party was actually an old synagogue that had been sold off. It was a big room, high ceiling, really ornate, kind of. Oh, come on, man, stop it. I'm gonna turn this off. Hang on a minute, Mike. Okay, sorry. Um, the Allman Brothers were just hauling their stuff out. They had just finished playing there, and we hauled ours in, set up for the sound check, and Led Zeppelin had already set up and had already done their sound check, so we didn't see them at that point. We set up, we did a sound check, came back to play, and hot room full of people, and we were good. We were doing our what we did, and crowd liked us. We went back up to the dressing room, which we shared with the Led Zeppelin guys, I think. Anyway, Robert Plant and Jimmy Page came bursting into the room. They were like, Jimmy Page came up to me and he goes, "Are you the guitar player?" And I said, No, that's the guitar player over there. And I pointed him, sent him over to Tommy. And Robert stayed and chit-chatted with Candy and myself. And we hit it off. He's the same age I am. He hadn't been a rock star for very long. A year earlier he was playing in bars in whatever, Manchester or some industrial place in England. And he was there because he loved to sing, and he really liked the music, and really cool. He told us about Hawaii and how exciting it had been to be in Hawaii and playing there. And they were like, "Oh yeah, we love you guys. You guys are, really happening band and all this." And then they went out and played, and we went down and watched them, and they were great. Jimmy Page was doing his violin bow trick on the guitar. It was a good show. It went on for a long time. We played for a pretty long set. In those days, if you were opening, you'd be lucky if you could get, 20, half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. I think we played for the best part of an hour before they came on. But unlike some other bands, they weren't really afraid of us, and so it turned out to be really nice. The last night there was a party somebody had an elaborate, beautiful loft apartment down on the harbor, right on the water, and we went to this party, and the roof was part of the apartment. They had set it up so you could go up on the roof and look out over the harbor, and it was gorgeous, and we sat up there and hung out. I had a really nice long talk with John Paul Jones, the bass player, and it was just at that point it was like my own opinion was well, this is where we belong. This is what we were. That's what we intended to do. And there was no reason at that point to think that we weren't going to. We hadn't made the stinky record yet, and we were, we had everything that we had done had been good. Every place we had played, people really liked us, and we were, we were confident. So that was what that was like.
So was Jimmy and Robert, would they have actually witnessed all 3 nights of you guys playing, or enough of it to then, by the time that party happened, you'd be getting more feedback from them?
Yeah, Jimmy Page was really, really cool with me. He pulled me aside and he said, "Look, so I understand you guys have you have an album out. Um, I assume you're going to be making another one."
Well, this would
And
have
I
been
said,
had you done the bathtub record yet?
"Yeah, oh yeah, the bathtub record. We had done the bathtub record. I think this is getting kind of out of order, Michael, but we had done the bathtub record. I'm thinking this was it April or May?
May.
May. So the bathtub record came out in January, February, something like that. And, we were touring to support that. I think it was probably still on Billboard at that point. It had gotten up to number 38 before it stalled out, which wasn't bad, for those days. But he said, you guys, you really ought to talk to Eddie Kramer about producing your next record. He says, I said, well, can you introduce us? And he goes, sure, I'll make a phone call, and which he did, and which I've always thought was pretty kind of him to do. But that, he thought that, we were respectable, and he was, um,
Let me just interject here.
yeah,
It was kind of him to do that, but I think that's a statement. Here's Eddie Kramer, who's Jimi Hendrix's partner in Electric Lady Studio. He's the engineer of his albums. For
yeah,
Jimmy to then say, I'll make that phone call, there's an unspoken, blew his mind kind of thing, I think, underneath all that.
well, it was sort of a spoken blew his mind when they came bursting into the dressing room
Yeah.
after our first set. Like, where's that guitar player? you know, he wasted no time, introducing himself to young Tom and, making friends. It was
So,
just, Robert and Candy were the same way. Robert was like, we saw Robert again, I think in 1974. We went to a Zeppelin show in Denver, and they were really on top of the pile at that time. And we were backstage because we got in because Barry let us in. And Robert came out of the dressing room and saw Candy, and he was just like, "Whoa, Candy!" Gave her a big hug, picked her up off the ground. He was like, it was
so,
really nice.
so again, Kit Thomas is going, I see you guys as potentially a Led Zeppelin with a female singer.
Kind of, yeah.
And here you are 6 months later, opening for them,
Yep.
and they're like going, wow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and so many Tommy fans don't have any sense that Jimmy Page became a fan of his in 1969, or of Zephyr,
No.
or Robert. They think of him as like, oh, you're kidding me? They like Tommy, and yeah, and Zephyr obviously as a band.
Yeah.
You,
People don't. Well, Zephyr was like, people don't understand how the music business works. They think that people just come, cracked out of an egg someplace, and they're just fully formed, and the reason that they become famous is because people like them. Well, that's true, but if you don't have a team of people working the media, for example, the Beatles, I don't think would have ever gotten anywhere if Brian Epstein hadn't bought the first 10,000 copies of their album. You know what I mean? It was Colonel Parker with Elvis. There would have been no Elvis without a Colonel Parker. For however, whether he was a good guy or a bad guy, it takes promotion to break into that machine. It's a machine. It's an industry. It's an industry like making pickles. You know, there are people in positions that open doors or close doors in the music business. And you know, you were doing video stuff, and it's the same. And it's like that today. It's not it's not a meritocracy as much as it is an aristocracy.
And within that, when Led Zeppelin signed with Atlantic, it was because of Ahmet Ertegun, who was the chairman of Atlantic Records and the most legendary of legendary figures in the music business.
A true music lover.
And that's why when they did the tribute show for him in 2008, that Led Zeppelin reformed with Jason when Robert had never wanted to, ever, and hasn't since.
No,
They
it was
did it
on one occasion. Yeah.
because of Ahmet Ertegun, that person, that man, who they never ever did anything but bow to how he had helped them.
He opened the door for them.
Yep.
Yeah, he opened the door, and that's the deal. And not only did he open the door for them, but they were prepared. Peter Grant, who was their manager, was a scary-looking, big, really kind of ugly guy. You know, I thought he was really a nice cat. He and I always had a good vibe between us. But people have told me stories about him that sound pretty chilling. But once the door opened, he walked through. You know, he was the one who made sure that they were in the magazines and they were, that their records got played and the record company paid attention to their album, and the things that really, they had publicists who wrote articles and sent them out to the magazines and so forth. Rolling Stone didn't write an article about them that said, "Who do these people think they are? They're a bunch of jokers from the Midwest," which is what they wrote about us. They were always taken seriously because they were fed properly into the device.
And did Peter, from all you know, and this is an issue we'll talk about later, was his management of them always something where he didn't steal the money, that he actually made sure they got their share of the money?
That's the case. I'm pretty sure that's the case. He was like an ex-bouncer guy. He wasn't some ritzy guy who just had a bunch of money and decided to, I think I'd like to have a band. It wasn't like that. He came out of the sort of gritty place where Robert Plant came from and John Bonham came from. I can't speak on Jimmy Page. I think he had a more genteel background, and I know John Paul Jones did.
And Jimmy had been a top session player, and he had been already known as
for years and years.
And the last version of the Yardbirds, he was basically in creative control of it and being a producer. And this was Led Zeppelin was his first. Okay, I'm going to really put all the pieces together now.
Yeah, I'm going to take advantage. And that's the other thing, is that Jimmy had built up the connects over the years that, of course, we didn't have. We were kids, Our connections were not with the people that ran recording studios and managers of bands and the sort of people you run into if you're a session musician. I did a couple of sessions with Carly Simon when I was working at Electric Lady. And just in that brief moment, I met 10 people that could have been, influential in my career had I followed up, So I'm sure, Jimmy Page, together with Peter Grant's sort of tough guy persona, was probably a really good combination,
And so
it just hurt that they made great records, and Jimmy was responsible for those records being so great.
He was the producer.
Yeah.
Period.
Exactly right.
So here's that last night, and Jimmy's talking to you about helping hook you guys up with Eddie. So and I know that there was then some connection here, but let's go back to just what happened next in terms of Zephyr playing, because now you're starting to, you're out there, you're doing it. And then you have June, July. What was all then happening in terms of Zephyr playing live?
I'm trying to remember. Well, we played it. We went back to Boulder. I believe we played up in Fort Collins at the Fort Collins, the field house at CSU. And I think we were the headliners. And that was a good show. We played at the Reed Ranch Rodeo Barn with the Grateful Dead that summer. Um, Barry didn't want us to play very often. He said, "Oh, I don't want you to get overexposed." Well, we were kind of like, "Well, man, we haven't really played together. You know, we mostly rehearsed together, but we haven't really been out there a lot." We played we did start playing more frequently. Marty Wolf and Alan Armstrong, who used to be a dear friend of ours, uh, had a connection at University of Colorado, where they had an artist series at the. They were putting them on at the UMC Glenn Miller Ballroom at the
Yep.
UMC,
Legend.
and we played a bunch of those. We played with the Sons of Chaplin. We played with John Mayall, and John Mayall, I think, was the first one.
And I know you've got a story about that show. So there you guys are opening for John Mayall, who has Mick Taylor as lead guitar player right before he joins the Rolling Stones. So what do you remember about that night?
Well, we were familiar with John Mayall. We were listening to John Mayall. I'm glad you pointed that out. When we were staying at Candy's mom and dad's place out by Brighton, we were listening to John Mayall. He was kind of, we took him seriously. I mean, this is the guy who found Eric Clapton, you know. So we were pretty excited. We were going to play a show in Boulder with a big band, and Mick Taylor was known from playing with the Blues Breakers, John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, and we all knew that Mick was a really good guitar player. He was really young at that point. I think he wasn't as young as Tommy, but he was young, you know. So we went in, we set up. John Mayall was always standoffish. We did a tour a couple years later, in a bus, and we toured all around the Northwest with him and his band. He never talked to us, ever. He didn't talk to us on the first gig, and he never talked to us on the bus. He was just had no interest in talking to us. But that was okay. We didn't care. Anyway, we set up. We played, and we played really well. And at that time, we were doing stuff like we kind of thought of ourselves as like being jazz rock guys, rock jazz guys. And so we would all, at some point in the night, we would all play solos, the way the jazz guys do. And we even had the dreaded bass solo, which, it was okay. It was not bad. People clapped, but Tommy, at that point, had started to really sort of use his Echoplex and doing stuff that no one had ever heard before. Candy was prime. We were fired up. We were ready to go. We thought, oh, this is great, man. We're going to play. We didn't really consider that this was a battle of the bands. We hadn't realized yet that every show is a battle of the bands, which of course it is. And so anyway, Tommy was so hot. And when we finished, I think we had to do like an encore or two. And John Mayall was hot. He was really mad that we had gone over so well. And Mick Taylor was, I would say, intimidated by Tommy. He really was. In fact, people started leaving while, they started, John Mayall singing all the blues, and people, after what we had done, it was just like, yeah, whatever. And people were like filing out of the place. So halfway through their set, there's like, half a house. And it's a big room. That room. It's a big,
thousand people.
Yeah, well, there was probably maybe 300 by the time halfway through their set. And it was a good day for us. It was a bad day for John Mayall, and it was a really bad day for Mick Taylor. Although Mick was cool, I think I recall, him and Tommy talking afterwards. And it didn't, it looked fine. It didn't look like, hey, geez, I'm sorry, man, or any of that kind of stuff. It was just a couple guitar players, having a conversation.
Do you remember, I think you mentioned something about Mick being out in the audience while you you guys were playing,
Yeah.
and him. Um,
Well, he was paying it close attention. You know, I I can't remember if he was like on stage off on one side or if he was down in the front. I think he was on stage actually, like watching from the side. I think he was over on that was Tommy's side, and I think he was over there on Tommy's side. Sort of, there was like a bathroom back there, and there was a little spot where you could stand, and he was like sitting there checking it out, you know. And this is nothing to do with Mick Taylor, the quality of his guitar playing. I think he's a great guitar player. I love the stuff he did in the Rolling Stones. Exile on Main Street's like my favorite Rolling Stones record. You know, it's just. But Tommy beat him up pretty bad that day, and because you know Tommy was a very competitive person. I played football with Tommy, against him, and you know Tommy always was a kid who played to win. Know? People thought he was this happy, smiley guy, you know, and he was. But when it came down to being in a contest, if somebody had to win, he thought it ought to be him. And fair enough, this is America, you know.
and in my doing these oral histories, which I've done at length with Johnny, he has shared that exact thing about the childhood.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, that Tommy was like wanted to win no matter what he was doing,
Yeah.
and that there were certain things he tried like boxing and football organized, and he got hit in the face right away in boxing. Went, nope, not going to do that. And that he then didn't want to do organized football because it was just too. It was it's violent,
Well,
but
it's
that
that. It's got that. They had that jock attitude, you know. And Tommy really didn't have a jock attitude. I mean, he wanted to win and he was competitive, but he wasn't. You know, let's have some more beers and you know, chase some chicks. You know, that wasn't his thing.
and like a year or two after he saw Elvis, he's like 6, 7 years old, and his dad's getting him in these talent contests, and he's doing Elvis. And there was this one that they did, and he came in second,
Oh,
and he was really not happy.
oh,
So
I bet.
there's the early manifestation of that, what you just mentioned, the competitive
Well,
stuff.
it takes a certain amount of that to get anywhere in show business. You know, shrinking violets have a really short shelf life in the show business. You know, um,
So anyway, you guys play that show. Obviously, that would have been exhilarating as far as
it was,
uh,
and every time we went in there, it was exhilarating because every time we went in there, you know, we went down a storm, as the English used to say. You know, it was always good for us.
and then it got, and then you said Sons of Champlin. You opened for them,
Yep.
but I know shortly thereafter, no, you guys weren't opening anymore. You were being booked into the UMC ballroom as the headliner,
Yeah, other people were opening for us. That's right.
and that was October '69 when I first went, and it might have been Sky King opening or somebody like, which was Brad Miller, who had been in Patch of Blue with Tommy back in Sioux City.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Brad. To me, what I remember is Conal Implosion.
Don Cameron.
Don Cameron. Yep,
Yep.
Cameron. Bob. No, I can't remember. Bob Weber, the guy from Sugarloaf, maybe.
Moonrakers, Bob Weber.
Yeah, maybe. I can't remember. Bob Yazel was in there somewhere. Oh
But
no, no. Kenny Passarelli and Jim Moon was the drummer. Kenny Passarelli was the bass player. Don Cameron was the guitar player, and Moon was the drummer. And they had
Wow.
opened. They had opened for us at the band shell. And the reason I got Yazel confused is Yazel had a band at that time, and there were two bands before we played, and Yazel was in the other one. So that was.
Well, I know that I saw both. I did see Sky King open for Zephyr once, because at that point I went to a number
I know
of
they did. They did.
different shows, but it was that night, and I had been into the Beatles and a lot of top 40 radio and hadn't really listened. My dad listened to Errol Garner and Ella Fitzgerald and stuff like that,
That
but I
doesn't.
had not, but I hadn't ever gotten into instrumental jazz.
Uh,
And here I am, and it's the second time I took Orange Sunshine.
oh, good.
And it's a well-known saying. Blew my mind. And here's Tommy doing his 20-minute Echoplex deal. It's like, just like Jimmy, like all these other people who nobody had ever seen this before.
No.
And here I am. I'm not a musician. I'm just this kid who's on acid for the second time. And I'm like, and I don't know if I really understood it, but I knew I had seen something that was incredible. The whole totality of it was, oh, you got it. Whoa, and that
Yeah,
was the beginning of my allegiance, which has never ended. Was that night at the Glen Miller Ballroom.
yeah, yeah. I've been remastering a bunch of old stuff, including the bathtub record for the last month. I just finished. And one of the things that I've listened to is a couple of, maybe three, I think, of those solos of Tommy's, the Echoplex, and sort of the middle parts of Cross the River, and it's just so amazing. I mean, and the good thing about having the opportunity to remaster this stuff is I got to spend a lot of time making the context right, so that Candy's voice isn't up here, she's sort of down it, because when she was singing, what she was hearing was she had a little bitty voice and a great big music, but what people, particularly on that first record, heard was singer and little bitty music, and that was not her concept. And it sounds silly, a lot of it, but when you put it in the context, it starts to make sense. You go, oh, I get what she's doing. Um, and Tommy's stuff is just, now that people have listened to EDM and this, there's a lot of things that have happened in the meantime. But at that time, synthesizers were just now beginning to be used. I think the Beatles used one on on Abbey Road, and everybody went, "Oh, listen to that synthesizer,"
You know
And
who used them? Might have been the first rock band to use them. 1967 was the Monkees.
oh yeah, the Monkeys used. Well, Lothar and the Hand people started using
Well, the
a
theremin. Oh
in
yeah,
1965, I think.
right.
And they were those guys, Paul Conley and Kim King and John Emlin from the Lothar and the Hand people, actually had worked with Robert Moog to make a machine that you could use on stage. I mean, they were that early into it, and they actually did a bunch of synth stuff on going back to Colorado on one of our songs. That was Lester Bangs, the critic from Rolling Stone, just went nuts. He just loved it, because John had played soprano sax on top of all this crazy, synthesized stuff, and Tommy was doing all kind of echoplex in the background, and it was just beautiful. Lester said it was like rays of sunshine coming down through the redwood forest, or some kind of stuff like that.
And yeah, I think you know Dexter Payne, the sax player, the clarinet player who was in Boulder at that time.
Yep.
And he shared a story with me. We haven't recorded him for this, but I think it was in '69 that I don't know if it was Moog or somebody brought a Moog synthesizer onto the CU campus, and that there was a day or two or whatever it was where there it was, and musicians came,
Hmm.
and Tommy was there, and Dexter was there, and that they were all excited about coming in and playing around, experimenting, jamming, whatever. And that's just a little aside
Oh
about
yeah.
that at
We were
that
really
time.
interested in that. When we went into Electric Lady, the very first night we got there, we went in after it was built. We were there when it was under construction first, when I first met Eddie. But when we actually went in, and the first time that we were going to work there, one of the first things that they showed us was Jimi Hendrix's synthesizer that he had just bought, and it was a completely state of the art. He had um, in those days, to do sequencing, you had to have these modules that could do like X many of notes, and then you'd have to have another one patched together to do the next X many notes, and so forth. And he had bought all the stuff. So Jimi Hendrix was going to be a synthesizer player had he lived, and I tremble to think about what that would have been like. But never happened. but he did buy that thing. And Tommy was, of course, we were all like, "Oh, synthesizer, that looks like fun." And happily, because of our connection with the Lothar guys who were from Denver originally, we got to do some of that early on, synth stuff, which was really cool. But at the time, the stuff that Tommy was doing, nobody else was making those sounds. I think Ace Frehley, the guy who played guitar for Kiss, they were produced by Eddie Kramer. And I have a sneaking suspicion, having seen it on television, that Ace was like really trying hard to do Tommy's Echoplex solo. He didn't quite pull it off, but he did try it.
So in doing some research about McLaughlin and Tommy and whatnot, I found some deep dive into the Jack Johnson album, and that they used the Echoplex there, and that Chick Corea was playing through the Echoplex, Sonny Sharrock
Oh yeah,
guitar was playing Echoplex through it, and Tommy, and so this is right when Tommy got his, and I'm sure that was an awareness he had from his New York, but that he was just as cutting edge with using that as anybody.
yeah. I mean, Tommy never heard those guys. The first time he ever heard an Echoplex is the first time I ever heard one. And Rick Derringer was still playing with the McCoys, and he used it very briefly in the middle of a solo. And Tommy and Candy and I were all sitting together in the scene in New York, and when that thing went off, we all went, "Ooh, we got to get one of those," and we did. That was there was no question about that. It was like the next day we went to Manny's and said, "Do you have one of those Echo things?" And they were like, "Oh yes, we got one right here." So that was that.
So we have hit my predetermined point of not wanting to ramble on too long, to have all these episodes kind of be a little bit contained.
Yeah.
And we can either carry on immediately thereafter here. I think there's other things we didn't talk about in terms of '69, the Denver Pop Festival. And then also just the whole process of recording the Bathtub album.
I think that'd be a good story. Going to L.A. and throwing firecrackers into the Grand Canyon in the middle of the night. That was good.
So let's go ahead and wrap up episode 2 here.
Yeah.
And David, this is just awesome. It's like turning on a faucet, being able to go through this stuff with you here. And so much of this is not part of the narrative of Zephyr or Tommy. And
Well, it deserves to be because we were sort of one of the foundation pieces for Tommy. When we were in the big time, we were probably better known outside of Colorado as a national act than we were in Colorado. People in Colorado said, "Oh, they're a local band, and we love them and stuff." But I don't think they realized how far we got and what kind of stuff we did. And most of the narrative is written by people like G. Brown, who came in well after the fact and discounted our contribution quite a bit.
well, Rick Schmidt, who we did a couple sessions with, who was amazing and great.
He's great. He's a wonderful person. Yeah.
I said, Rick, so what was it like being a musician in Boulder, and what did Zephyr represent? He goes, "We had rock stars in our midst." So while other people may have discounted you guys,
Not everybody.
he wasn't one of them.
No, and you know what? Even today, there are people, on Facebook who write stuff to me about, man, that was the greatest. I think I saw you guys 50 times and it was great every time, stuff like that. So, there's a bunch of old people out there that have these good memories of us, which is really wonderful.
And the one point I'll just say here that has more to do with what we want to talk about later, what you just shared about Peter Grant and how he made sure he stage managed
Yeah,
the Led Zeppelin PR campaigns and the airplay campaigns,
control their image.
and that you guys never had the benefit of somebody who really understood how to do that for an artist.
We
And
did for 2 weeks.
We'll just leave it at that. That you didn't have that,
No.
and thus that's why you wind up saying, "Oh, we were better known in other states in Colorado. Let's go ahead and wrap this up and say goodnight, David.
Hey, man. Thanks a lot, Mike.
We'll be back.
Here's my cat. Say goodbye to my cat. My goodbye cat.
What's the name of the cat?
Wizzo.
Wizzo.
Wizzo the cat. Yeah. She's a great cat.
And thank you, David. And we'll be back here very soon for part 3.
Terrific. See you then.